Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is Susan Ryan. I'm the Senior Director for the Greenhouse Project, and today we are going to continue our series on the Greenhouse Project's Best Life Memory Care approach. And before I introduce our speaker, I want to remind everybody that you are in listen-only mode. And what that means is that if you've got a question, you'll need to put it in the chat box. At the end of the webinar, we are saving time for questions. So our presenter today will go through the presentation, and at the end, she will be able to take your questions. So today, I'm really excited for the topic and really excited to introduce my good friend and colleague, Anne Ellett. I met Anne years ago back at a conference, an assisted living conference, and I was so incredibly impressed with the wealth of knowledge and expertise and data that she collected on the memory care approach that she was utilizing in her life at that time. It wasn't long, I guess probably maybe 10, 15 years later, Anne and I were able to get our heads together, and I invited Anne to really take a review of the Greenhouse Project's dementia curriculum, our approach, and Anne developed for us what I believe is one of the most compelling and well-differentiated approaches to memory care, to dignified memory care. Really excited for what it has done to the Greenhouse model and to what we do with regards to offering an incredible model, but it's that philosophical approach that goes inside. And with regards to memory care, Anne has done much to develop the curriculum and the approach that really, I believe, is a game changer and a well-differentiated product. So today, Anne is talking about one of the 4 core principles that underline the best life approach, and that is advocacy. And what exactly is it, and why is it so important? So with that, Anne, I'm going to get out of the way and turn the time over to you so that you can share with all of those on today's webinar advocacy and why that's important. Anne?
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Appreciate you joining us on this topic. As Susan said, our topic is advocacy, and why is this important? Why is it necessary? So I'm going to start with I'm sorry, can everyone hear me? I want to start with the story of Judith when we're talking about advocacy. This is a story that my neighbor told me last week about her mother. So I've changed the name, but many of the details are actually what's happening with her mother. So she's an 83-year-old woman living with dementia, and she's fairly healthy. Is able to do a lot of her own self-care, takes minimum medications, but because of memory changes, she's been living in a memory care unit in a nursing home. And my neighbor across the street gets a call from one of the staff members that her mother had a cognitive level change in the past 2 days. She seems more confused. They described her as agitated, uncooperative, and they had called the doctor, and the doctor had prescribed 2 medications for her to help calm her down, Ativan and Klonopin to help her sleep. So the next day, my neighbor got a call that her mom had a fall and was currently in the emergency room. So this is such a common occurrence. Probably everyone on this call has a similar story from where they're working. So I think we have to ask ourselves, at what point was anyone Judith's advocate? And there were many points to intervene, that there were opportunities to maybe change the outcome of this story. So let's first review, as Susan said, advocacy is the fourth core principle of Best Life. And the core principles, the power of normal, creating normalcy for people who are living with dementia. Remembering that we focus on their retained abilities, that we don't let the diagnosis of dementia define them. And the dignity of risk. We can't take all risk away. Of course, we want safe outcomes, but that doesn't mean we have to take the dignity of adulthood and dignity of being able to have some choice and some risk. And really, in some ways, I think advocacy is the most important of the core principles, because if we don't advocate for a person to be allowed to live a normal life, if we don't advocate for a person to be able to take some risk, if we don't believe and focus on their retained abilities, then these principles are just words. We have to advocate to make these other principles happen. We know what it means to be an advocate for someone or to advocate for them. We're going to speak for them, in favor of them. We're going to recommend them. We're going to represent the cause and the well-being of the other person. It indicates that we believe in them, we support them, we encourage them, we promote them. And I think often as professionals, and I know me as a nurse, I forget that that's part of my role. I'm so caught up sometimes in checking the boxes that I forget that really my first role is to know that elder as a person and to support them and believe in them. So I think I had to stop and think. I know there's been times in my life when it's been wonderful to have an advocate, when I've benefited from having an advocate. What about a colleague that we might ask for a reference for a new job you're applying for? You're asking them to verify your talents, your skills, your capabilities. Maybe vouch that they think you're capable of taking on more responsibility in a new role. So how would that apply to being an advocate for a person living with dementia? Well, it could be the difference is if a new person were to move into your nursing home or your memory care unit. For example, maybe an older gentleman, maybe appears frail. He moves in, he comes in a wheelchair, he doesn't talk much. His chart tells you that he has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Well, as a care professional, you could look at that older man and see only his frailties and inabilities and losses. Or maybe we could think, he has losses and inabilities, but maybe it's because no one has taken the time to get to know the whole person. Maybe no one has consistently helped him and given him the confidence to be able to stand on his own and take some steps independently. Because that does take more time, doesn't it, for the care staff than just pushing him everywhere in a wheelchair. Maybe the care team just made assumptions due to his diagnosis and he was defined by the diagnosis of dementia. So being an advocate for this man could be life-changing for him. We know that the majority of elders who move into greenhouse home are living with some form of dementia. 85%, that's a pretty strong majority. And there's plenty of studies out there that show this is the case for really all levels of senior living, whether it's assisted living, nursing homes. even when we talk to people who are operating independent living communities, they talk about how many of the people living there have some form of dementia. So I've been trained as a professional nurse to see the inabilities, the losses, and not the strengths and talents and needs of a person living with dementia. We become blind to their needs, and we often discount them. We know that 50% of people living with dementia have experienced some form of abuse. I mean, that's an amazing statement, I think, amazing statistic. Would we allow that if we said 50% of our children had experienced some form of abuse? It's so commonplace that we treat them as less than an adult. Oh, they won't know the difference. We often segregate them and confine them. And that's another discussion that I love to talk to people about. And as I said, we've been trained to focus on their losses rather than their capabilities. So people with a diagnosis of dementia, they often will try and hide it. They know they will be discounted and dismissed, and there's a stigma to being diagnosed with dementia. And, you know, I can test myself with this because when I'm someplace and I meet someone, and whether it's in a medical environment or it's socially, and someone introduces me, and they right away will say, "Oh, this is my mom. She has Alzheimer's disease." And in my mind, I just immediately begin to look at her through a different lens. I have to be aware of what my training and my perception is that can be quite biased. And I think the other thing that's interesting that I think about a lot is, why do people feel the need to introduce someone by their diagnosis? If you were out with a group of people, would somebody say, "Oh, this is my mom, she has heart disease"? Probably not. But often people feel the need to label and include that information. So this stigma, this devaluation, one of the ways it shows up is when we look at rates of depression in housing for older adults. In nursing homes, it's 50%. I mean, again, that's very profound. Assisted living, residential care communities, it's about 25%. So very significant numbers here of people experiencing dementia. So persons living with dementia, they may not be able to advocate for themselves. Sometimes that is due to the dementia, but sometimes it's just that our healthcare system is so fragmented, it can be overwhelming. And I, get stories and experiences about that from people who do not have dementia, but they're going through the healthcare system, and they talk about how one doctor might not know what the other one prescribed, or one doesn't know that certain tests have been ordered, or people don't communicate with them about results, or nobody looks at them as the whole person. So that's how our healthcare system is. It can be overwhelming. We have our cardiologist and orthopedist and neurologist, and families and the person living with dementia just get fatigued and confused. Another way that the stigma or the devaluation of persons with dementia is displayed is that there often is different standards of care, different standards even for the environment, if it's a memory care area. So this is a recent photo showing perhaps some different standards for the memory care unit. Why would a refrigerator be padlocked? I doubt if you would see that if it was in the front in an area that was not designated for memory care. But somehow in the memory care area, it's okay to padlock a refrigerator. which is a really strange thing. So there's lots of locked doors, meaning lots of examples of taking away choices and dignity. Not just outside doors are locked, sometimes even the refrigerator door is locked. Here's another example of different standards. And the picture on the left with the pretty flowers and the nice table settings and the color, and it looks very enticing, is set up for the lunch meal in a assisted living in their front dining room. And in the back of their area, they have a small memory care area. And this is what the tables look like there. It was the same meal. So when I showed these pictures to the people that work there, they went, oh my gosh, they didn't even notice. But it had become okay to provide different environment, different resources for their memory care area. So what can we do to be an advocate? And I think to start with, we want to have fresh eyes and ears. What do we see? What do we hear? How do we hear people talk and refer to people when they're talking about someone who has the diagnosis of some type of dementia? And I think we have to ask ourselves, is this okay? Does it sound dignified? Does it sound like the person is being included? Does it sound like the person is being honored? As we move throughout our care environment, does everything look the same? Or is the memory care area really the area where they keep putting off getting the new furniture and the new carpeting, but the area up in the front looks pretty beautiful and luxurious? I do see that sometimes. When I travel around the country, I always try and tour. If I go down a street and I see a place that says we do memory care, if I have time, I'll just pull in and ask for a tour. And this is something that I often see. So let's use an example of a person in pain. Any of us here on this call, if someone told you they were in pain, what would you do? Well, you'd ask a lot of questions. You'd get more information. Where is the pain? When did it start? Is it constant? Is it intermittent? What makes it better? What makes it worse? How long have you had it? So we would get a lot more information. We would want to do an examination of the part of the body that was hurting. We would probably consult and call in other experts. And we would very closely monitor that person to see how the pain was affecting them. But if a person living with dementia changes their actions and, for instance, paces or calls out or isolates themselves or doesn't cooperate, what is done? Well, often that's labeled as challenging behavior. And we can go back to the story we talked about at the beginning today of Judith, where she was given Ativan and Klonopin for her challenging behavior. So at what point was anyone Judith's advocate? There were several points to intervene. And in the Greenhouse Project, we talk about deep knowing, that when an elder moves into a greenhouse home, you don't know someone well right away. You can get that history from them. You can get the history from their significant family members, but it may not really tell you everything about that person. It takes time. So deep knowing is hard work. It means spending time. It means listening. It means having consistent care partners, not changing the staffing all the time, that you have people that have worked there for months, if not years, The elder, the person affected with dementia, is not having to get to know a new person every day. It means that we get to know them well enough that we can observe for changes. We can say, oh, something different is going on with Judith. And often there'll be gradual changes. If we know them well enough, if we take our time, it's not that one day Judith is engaged and happy to participate, and the next day she's a totally different personality. Often there was a gradual change. And if we know her well enough, we can observe for that and start saying, I wonder if something's going on there. So I call it pause and be with. You don't have to do anything. It means just being there, observing, listening, creating a safe environment, and getting to know the person well. So when my neighbor was called, she said 2 days ago, they described her mother as agitated and uncooperative. So there was another opportunity to intervene and be Judith's advocate. Again, the team could meet and say, is this a change from baseline? It certainly sounds like it was. What do we need to investigate? What questions do we need to ask? Who gave her a good physical exam to see if she was in pain? Maybe she'd had an unwitnessed fall and had a fracture somewhere. Maybe she had a urine infection. We don't know unless somebody took the time to say, this is a change for Judith. What can we learn? We could have consulted with other experts. Those experts could have been her family members. Has she ever acted this way before? My neighbor said if they had called her, she could have given them some information. Other experts could be other medical team members. And then meeting with the team. The whole team has great input. It's not just the nurses. It's not just the CNAs. It's the whole team meeting together and saying, what do we know about Judith? Let's just take some time here and think about what's going on. So the staff called the healthcare provider, and this is what happened. So we got 2 prescriptions for psychoactive medications, and which resulted in Judith becoming probably sedated, over-medicated, and resulting in a fall, which took her to the emergency room. But even calling the healthcare provider and getting the prescriptions for the psychoactive medications, I think at that still was another opportunity there. The team could have had another meeting and say, well, wait a minute. Do we think something else is going on? Nurses can always delay giving something if they think there's a reason to explain that. So the nurses could have delayed giving those psychoactive medications until they had more information. They could have increased their monitoring. And again, let's just spend some time with Judith and see if we can learn more from her. So there were many points there where we could have intervened and maybe been an advocate for Judith. So why is advocacy important? Well, here's another example of another, in a somewhat similar case. I was touring in a memory care unit, and I was told that this particular person, this woman, was very mean. She was refusing care, and they advised me it was best just to leave her alone, and she'd come out of her room when she felt like it. Well, I was new there, and I was trying to get to know the residents. So as I was moving around, I go into her room, and I saw a very petite older woman talking to herself in Spanish, sitting in her recliner in her room. She didn't yell at me or seem to get agitated when I walked in. So I just knelt down next to her recliner and introduced myself. And I noticed that she kind of pulled back and recoiled when I reached out to touch her hand. And so I just got real quiet and I just paused there without trying to approach her anymore. Just was real quiet there for a couple of minutes. And I observed that she kept one foot tucked behind the other, like she was trying to protect it. She had on some big soft slippers, and eventually she let me touch the slippers and slip them off. And her toenails, I don't know any other word or adjective better than that they were just gross. They were long, they were curved under. In some places, the toenails actually were cutting into the next toe. And one great toenail was ingrown and infected. It was all red and had pus on it. And her feet must have hurt so terribly. So when I talked to the staff, they said she didn't want anyone to touch her, so they were leaving her alone. But I had to ask them, did anyone spend any significant time with her? Did anyone really see her? So I think often we see them as people living with dementia. They're often seen as, well, they won't know the difference. They're unable. As long as we keep them comfortable and safe, that's enough. We know what they need and they want. And seldom do we take the time to put the person before the task. And I recognize that all of us here on the call working in whatever area of long-term care that you work in, the demands on you and your time are tremendous every day. But I think, again, if we don't pause and look at the person, then we're just coming to work and doing a checklist of tasks. So we're going to talk about another case. Some of you on the call may have heard me mention Ralph before. This is a case that I'd like you to be thinking about this as I'm describing it, because I'm going to ask you to contribute some ideas of things that maybe we could offer Ralph and how we could be a better advocate for him. So Ralph moved into the care community about 4 months ago. He and his wife lived in their house just 4 blocks away. And he very much enjoyed repairing and maintaining his house. And when his wife died a year ago, Ralph self-isolated, didn't really go outside, and he began to not take good care of himself. He had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease 2 years ago, but generally he's in good health and he is pretty independent on most of his tasks. But Ralph's son intervened and initiated the move into the care community so he wouldn't be lonely and isolated. So Ralph is a very pleasant gentleman, usually agreeable. He does engage somewhat, but he also seems to be comfortable spending time in his room. And because his house is nearby, he knows the neighborhood well, and on several occasions, he has slipped out the front door or the kitchen door and goes back to his house. His son is understanding, but is getting impatient that you can't keep Ralph at your care community. He's considering moving him to another, more secure environment. So let's think about some of our choices. You can call the nurse practitioner for some medications to keep Ralph more calm, maybe so he won't have the energy to walk out the front door and go home. We could agree with his son that he really does need to live in a more secure environment and we can't really take care of him. We could put a wander guard on Ralph, so it beeps when he goes out a door. We can review our elopement policy with the team and put together a plan to keep Ralph inside. Or let's just take some time here and think. What else could we do? How could we be his advocate? instead of reacting to, oh my gosh, Ralph got outside, he eloped. Let's take some time, think about what his needs are and what is he saying to us with his actions. So, what would it look like if we were Ralph's advocate? Well, we would have to change our perspective. If we saw his actions and desire to return and check on his house as a normal adult action, that's probably something that almost any of us on this call would do. If we were moved just a few blocks away from where you had lived for many years, from where you felt you had purpose and meaning, from where your home was, wouldn't we be wanting to go back? So really that can be considered a very normal adult action. So if we don't label his action as elopement, which is another word for escaping, really, if we think about it, which means that we are keeping him confined, we're keeping him locked up. But if we take time to think how we could accommodate his need, which hopefully many of us on this call would agree is a normal need. It's a normal adult action. So what was the problem? And who was it a problem for? Was it a problem for Ralph? Maybe not. Was it a problem for the care community? Probably was. It wasn't, the care community wasn't supposed to allow Ralph to leave without being accompanied, without supervision. So in the traditional model, the operative word is allow. We are in control. We will give permission when an elder can do something. We will decide when Ralph, or even if Ralph, is allowed to go outside and back to visit his house. He is not in control and he can't decide that. That's the traditional view of this situation. So what steps could we take? What are other alternatives? And if we implement another solution, is it effective and beneficial for both Ralph and the care community? So I would love it if, I see we have lots of people on the call. I would love it. I'm going to pause here for a couple minutes. And I would love it if some of you would go into the chat line and describe some ideas of what you think we could offer to Ralph. Be creative, think outside the traditional box. What could we offer to Ralph? So I'm just going to pause here for a couple minutes and see if some of you have some good ideas. Well, I'm not seeing any brave souls here I know you all have some good ideas. And when we get cases like this, I love to brainstorm together because usually it's not just one person who comes up with the solution. It's the best solution. It's usually a team working together. Sometimes it's people, fresh eyes, learning about this specific situation, and they have some creative ideas.
And
so,
yes, and you've got one. It says schedule some time to go visit his house with his son. So that was one. And then there's another one. Ask his son to walk his father home weekly. So there you've got a couple.
I love those. So those are great solutions that I would thank you for putting those forward. And those are great solutions that I would absolutely support. And it shows that, you know, people kind of step back, were thoughtful, and recognize that this was a need for Ralph, and how could they make it real. So
Here's one,
great
and
idea.
one more. Ask him for assistance doing maintenance projects around the facility.
Oh, you guys, you're so brilliant. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hold on, Mike Belleville. Oh, sorry. I thought he was writing something. Yeah. Took him on a daily walk to check on the house. If workers go by the house, they take photos to show Ralph. Put a picture of Elder's house and a sold sign in his room.
Ah. Well, that would be an interesting exercise, and I would not know what reaction Ralph would get, but it might help him understand that he had moved. So, well, those are great ideas. Good.
One more. Let me just give him some meaningful projects to do around his new community, since he likes to fix things.
Yes.
Back to you.
Okay, so that's perfect. That we all think alike. We recognize that he has this need. He might be in transition, has not fully settled and adapted to his new environment. So, what more can we know about him? And like people mentioned, he is a real putterer and fixer around his home. The other thing we learned is that he did have a dog, and he walked his dog every day. We also want to learn, what are his current interests, talents, and skills? Was there anything new that he has expressed interest in? Also taking time to say, well, who really does engage with Ralph the best? Who has the best relationship with him? And he did have meet some friends for coffee, it sounds like. That was part of his life. So are any of those friends or groups available that could continue to engage him? And then the other thing is, he's lost his wife, he's lost his house, he's maybe lost his sense of purpose. Is there someone that could talk to him? Is he experiencing sadness and grief? So those are possible suggestions. And like we said, fixing his house and walking his dog were important things for him. And so here's, very much like people have already suggested, here's what we did for Ralph. We changed our perspective, recognized that, yeah, we probably all would want to be going back to see our home. We asked his son had taken his dog when Ralph moved with us. We asked his son if Ralph's dog could come back and live with him. That helped give him some purpose. Ralph became the head of the unofficial men's walking group. So Ralph no longer kind of slipped out the front door by himself, but he went and looked for his dog's leash, and then he started to invite his other male friends. And so that gave us all a heads up that Ralph was getting ready to head out. And we often could send someone with him, saying, well, just because it's a big group, or in case your dog gets away, we want to be sure to have someone around to help you. So we were able to usually send a staff person with him. And Ralph took real pleasure in leading his friends on a walk around the neighborhood with his dog. And then, like some of you have already suggested, we got him involved in fixing things in the community. The maintenance director kind of took Ralph under his wing. They went to Home Depot together. They gave Ralph a tool belt, and they did rounds together, and they checked things, and they gave Ralph a pad to check off things and make suggestions of things that needed to be fixed. So it gave him more purpose. So last I heard, Ralph was still wanting to visit his house, and this has been a couple years. So he still wants to visit that. It will always be part of his history, but he's not slipping out without people being aware of it. So good suggestions. Thank you all. So Kate Swaffer, who's a great advocate for people living with dementia, and she reminds us that that they have a right to be supported in their independence, that we should be enabling their independence as much as we can, and don't let dementia define them and take away their normal life. So our goals following the Best Life Core principles is we wanted to create normalcy for Ralph. Instead of considering him someone who eloped, and I really, those of you that know me know that's not a favorite word with me. I just think it's such an undignified word. If we were in someone's house and they walked out the front door, we wouldn't say, oh, she eloped. We'd say, oh, that person wants to go outside. So we want to create normalcy for Ralph. We want to look at our perspective on things. Of course, we don't want him wandering distances without our knowledge. We want to mediate the risk, but we can't take all the risk away. He still is a very independent. He has talents. He likes to have purpose. And his actions were rational. They weren't because he had dementia. Wanting to visit the house he had lived in for years, where he had raised his family and lived with his wife, that desire is not because he had dementia. It was actually a rational desire. So the staff, like many of you, suggested, advocated for his well-being. So I think if we just let the dementia define somebody, we're so apt to label their actions as they're doing this because of their dementia, therefore it doesn't matter. Instead, if we look at it and say, this is actually probably something that I would be doing also, or this is a legitimate need, how can we advocate for that person to fulfill that? So, and then I just leave us with one of my favorite authors. Why advocate? Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So I thank you all for your participation, and we have time for some questions if anyone has some questions.
Just type your questions in the question box, and I'll be happy to read them for Anne. And just so you know, there will be a link that will be sent out to everybody after the webinar, so that you'll be able to have access to this presentation today. So any questions, anything that you're sitting with?
It's probably like kind of preaching to the choir, because I imagine people who attend this webinar are probably already great advocates.
That would be great. I think that advocacy, I mean, you've really helped us to realize how important it is. And I'm just really thankful, Anne, that you kind of gave us a couple stories to really think about it and to really apply some of our best thinking to being an advocate. So wait just another minute. Okay, let's see if we've got some. I think did you scroll down a little bit? So how to work on advocacy as a team when some team members are resistive to new strategies? That's a great question. So Anne, what suggestions might you give to this person?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking that. Something that we all struggle with. At the Greenhouse Project, you've probably heard many of us talk about beliefs, behaviors, and systems. And as part of the Best Life approach, I ask that we be aware of our own beliefs and behaviors, and that helps change. But sometimes we have the system, and that can mean other people that you work with that still have traditional beliefs and behaviors, or the administration that is resistant, or they're fear-based and they don't want to change. And so for myself, the way I approach it is we just have to continue the dialogue. We have to continue to ask questions. If we didn't do that, we would still be tying people into beds and chairs like we did 20 years ago. So we have to continue to ask the questions. Is there a better way? What could this action really mean? What could this person really need? And it doesn't mean we live in a perfect world and we're going to get complete support when we want to look at things in a different way. But I applaud you all for having the courage to continue to ask the questions. And I do believe that things are beginning to change, partly because I think the consumer, meaning the customer, which is often the family members, they're saying, it's not okay. It's not okay that my mom never gets to go outside. It's not okay that she spends all day in a wheelchair looking at TV. If you can't do better, then I'm going to look for other options. So I think the consumer is getting more informed. I think there's a wonderful national and really international dialogue going on. Like you saw the quote from Kate Swaffer. We have wonderful Mike Belville, who's a consultant with us here at the Greenhouse. These are people who are living with dementia, and we are learning from them. They are reminding us, hey, I'm a whole person. Hey, I have talents and skills and needs, and I'm not to be discounted and devalued. So thank you for asking. I don't have a magic answer other than to continue on the journey and continue to ask questions. And if we can crack that door a tiny bit, then progress has been made.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think, to remain curious and to ask the questions to really get at why there is resistance. So here's another question. Do volunteers act as advocates, or is it only paid staff? So what's the role of a volunteer with regards to advocacy?
Well, I love volunteers. Sometimes they take a lot of time from the staff because volunteers can be a blessing and they can also kind of take up a lot of your time. But I love them because I consider them fresh eyes. And so in that sense, I consider them advocates because sometimes they ask a question, why do we lock that refrigerator? And then you have to stop and think, why do we lock that refrigerator? What did that start with? How did that get started? Why is that part of what we do every day? So I absolutely believe volunteers can be advocates. We want to partner with our volunteers so they also know what your day is like as a professional and how busy you are and how many responsibilities you have. But they can be a wonderful person to, like I was saying, pause and be with, to get to know an elder well and bring information and a side of that elder that we may not know. So I absolutely believe a volunteer can be an advocate for a person living with dementia.
All right, got a few more. Here's one about working with regulatory agencies across the country. So what interactions are you having with regulatory agencies, and is there any pushback on risk?
Yes, we are working with them, and yes, there are pushbacks. And I know Susan can speak to this also. There's nothing that says in regulation that elders can't go outside. So if your elders are not allowed outside, that's a decision that your team has made, but it's not written in regulations that elders can't go outside. What's written in regulations is some kind of language that says elders must be provided with staffing and adequate staffing that will help keep them safe during the day or something like that. But there also will be regulatory language that says elders are allowed to have choice. Elders are allowed to, express personal preferences. So often it's our fear that we err by making things too locked down, too confining, too lack of choice, because we think it's going to make the elder safer and make it easier for our relationship with the regulatory agencies. Actually, again, we have to have the courage to advocate for this elder and say, this is why it's important that Ralph go out and visit his house. It's not that he's doing this because he has dementia. It's because, like any of us, it would be important for him to see where he had lived, and it was so meaningful for him in his life. Here are the measures we have done to help keep Ralph safe. So we have to advocate, but also, of course, be able to articulate what we have done to keep people safe. Susan, you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, just to add a comment, I think for me what I have found particularly effective when we're working with regulators and surveyors, our regulations are really wanting to become more person-centered. And to your point about deep knowing relationships, I think the more we deeply know who that person is, in the case of Ralph, really understanding who he is as an individual, as a person who's got needs, and really to use the regulations in our favor to really talk about how by deeply knowing Ralph, this is the care plan that we have put together for Ralph because of who he is as an individual and knowing his preferences and so forth. And here's what we've done to ensure that it's a good trip to his house, and that care plan is a good plan. The other thing is, Ralph is a human, and as a human being, he has the same rights as any other human being has, and that's part of our guidance, regulatory guidance. And Ralph even has the right to make a wrong choice. And so, it's the autonomy and the control that is a human right. So, yes, there are pushbacks, but I have found that the more consistent our care assignments are, the more our care teams are in deep knowing relationships and see the person beyond the disease and really design a care plan and really work with that person, the better things are. I'm going to read another comment real quick. It says, we have court-appointed advocates for foster children who are in foster homes. Why not organize advocates for memory-challenged seniors with proper and more meaningful training? Well said.
Yeah, what an interesting idea. Well, court-appointed advocates for children are usually because they do not have any guardian at that time that's been deemed suitable. Elders often, as we all know, have a family member who has legally been given the right to make decisions for them. So that is assumed that they'll also be their advocate. But that's a very interesting idea. I'm thinking, in some ways, ombudsmen should be advocates also. But really, I have to say, I think advocacy starts with each of us who are closest to that elder for the majority of the day. I think we know them, the deep knowing. Another example, in a greenhouse home not too long ago was a daughter who was really putting pressure on the staff to get their mom up. She didn't want her sleeping late. She wanted her mom active, up, hair fixed, and at the breakfast table by 8:30. And so as the staff got to know this elder, they realized maybe that had been her pattern many years ago, but it no longer was. She liked to sleep till 10 or 11, and then would have coffee and a breakfast, and then maybe she would get dressed and comfortable, and she'd like to stay up late till 1 or 2. And so the daughter, who had the legal authority to make decisions for her mom and didn't like not being in control, it took quite a while for the daughter to trust the staff well enough to say, she didn't want to admit it, but she finally did say, you guys know my mom better than I do right now, and I trust you that she's having the life she wants to have. But it took a while. So yeah, I think all of us can be advocates from really observing and listening and getting to know each individual.
That's great, Anne. And I'm going to end with a comment from Dolores Hughes. She says, once you develop a plan for advocacy, share it, communicate it, care plan it, so that we're all on the same page. Make it a topic for a team meeting, and then reevaluate your plan. So thanks for that comment. And Anne, thank you for your incredible presentation today. Before we end, I'm going to just offer a few slides that will talk about some of the things that are coming up on future webinars. We've got on September 12th at 3 o'clock, Audrey Weiner is going to talk about Sarah Newman and their transformation to small houses within a traditional legacy building. That will be September 12th at 3 o'clock. The next thing I want to let you know about as part of our Greenhouse 2.0 series is the Beverwick story. And this is 2 small houses were built outside Albany, New York, wanted to become a certified greenhouse home. So on September 17, they're going to share their journey. And I was with them to celebrate last week their accomplishments, and that's their incredible team there. The next thing I wanted to share with you is our workshop. Actually, let's talk about our engaged workforce on September 26th. Steve McAlilly is, he knows a little bit about operating greenhouse homes and really leading the workforce through the lens of love. And Steve will be presenting along with Nikki Rainier from Holleran Consulting. They're going to share their experiences, how you lead through the lens of love, and how you know you're successful. What are the metrics for success? And then last but not least, we'll talk about our workshop, which will be at John Knox Village, October 2 and 3. You can find out details on our website. This is a really great way to, seeing is believing. You don't really know greenhouse until you've stepped foot into a greenhouse home. And this is a great opportunity for you to do so. Last but not least, do check us out on our social media channels, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course, Facebook. Thank you all so much for your time and your interest, and we hope to talk to you again on a future webinar. and hope to see you at John Knox Village in October. Take care. Have a great afternoon. Thanks again, Anne.
Thank you, everybody.